Hello, my name is Grace Duddy Pomeroy, and I'm the director of the Stewardship Leaders Program at Luther Seminary, which is located in St. Paul, Minnesota. Now today, I'm filming this video in downtown Minneapolis in my apartment. So please excuse if you hear any of the construction noise outside during this video. Today, we're going to be talking about one of my absolute favorite topics, generosity with adults under 40, and particularly how you can engage them in the area of stewardship. Now, I think it's important for you to know right off the bat that I am a member of this adults under 40. I'm in my early 30s, so I align with the millennial generation. Today, we're going to be talking about the millennials and the Gen Zers specifically. Now, if I've already lost you with some of that generational jargon, do not worry. I'll be going through those generations in detail to bring you up to speed in just a couple minutes. During this video, I'm going to walk you through giving trends. First and foremost, what do we know about the generosity that these generations are already exhibiting? Then I'll be walking you through the facts and figures. What do we know about their financial situation? And I'll be ending with a David Letterman style top 10 list, giving you some tactics and ideas to engage these demographics. So let's dive in. First things first, we're going to look at giving trends using one of my ultimate favorite resources, the Next Generation of American Giving, which was put together by Blackbaud. I'll be providing a link to this information to the Synod office, so you can access it there, but of course you're welcome to Google it as well. I'll be looking specifically at the 2018 data, so please bear in mind this is a little old, but I think it's some of the best information we have. And I'll also be thinking back to the 2013 edition where they asked some similar questions, and I can give you some comparison. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking specifically about millennials and Gen Zers, but I also wanted to provide you with the data that we have about the baby boomer generation, just so you have some comparison points. So let's dive in and take a closer look. We're going to begin by talking about the baby boomers. Now, the baby boomers today are ages 74 to 56. Now, bear in mind, I'm going off the Pew Research Center's data. So if you're a baby boomer and you don't quite align with these dates, no worries. I'm just using the Pew Research data, and you can certainly align with whatever fits best for you. The birth years are 1946 to 1964. Let's take a closer look at the data from that Next Generation of American Giving study. Now, I think it's important here at the beginning to recognize the fact that this study is not just about religious organizations, it's about generosity and charity across the board. So we're talking about philanthropy in all of its forms. Here's what we know about baby boomers. 75% of folks in this generation give, and they give on average about $1,000 per year across 4 different charities. Now let's learn a little bit more about their giving patterns. As you probably know, baby boomers represent almost 50% of the total giving pie. So baby boomers are a big demographic to pay attention to. And how do they like to give? Often I like to say that baby boomers will take the whole buffet line. Whatever way you'd like for someone to give, likely you're going to find a baby boomer that's going to go along with that. Just over a quarter will give via mail. 35% are engaging online. That's actually one of the biggest areas for this demographic to engage. And online can happen, of course, through a desktop or laptop computer. It can also happen through an iPad or even a mobile phone. Now that bottom piece there, 25% with that kind of little mobile phone and a heart, that's talking about crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is generally done online with a big project and multiple small gifts given to it. So for instance, this is a secular example, but an artist might be making their very first CD and they need money towards the recording and the creation of that album. So they have a big goal, let's say $10,000 that they need to raise, and they're hoping to get gifts of $5, $10, $20, even $100 from hundreds of people to help make up that number. That's crowdfunding. It's cause-based projects, small gifts from a large number of people. And generally it's done online, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. As you can see, crowdfunding is a big piece for this population as well. Crowdfunding is done on sites like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, GoFundMe, sites like that. So likely you're familiar with this and you may have even given a crowdfunding gift yourself. We see that social media giving is around 11% for this generation, and text giving is around 3%. Text giving across the board tends to be pretty low across the generations, as we'll see. Now, overall giving priorities, baby boomers like to give first and foremost to local social service organizations, followed by places of worship, and then health organizations. So next, let's take a look at millennials. Millennials were born between 1981 and 1995. They are ages 39 to 25. So now we are diving into that under 40 population. Let's see what we can learn about them. Just over 50% of folks in this generation give, and they give on average about $600 per year. So right away, you'll notice that there's less people in this generation that are giving in comparison to the baby boomers, and they're also giving less. Of course, bear in mind where this generation is in their life cycle. Many of them are just starting out as young adults in their first, second, or third career, and many are getting married and starting families. There's a lot of financial obligations going on here. And they're giving across 3.5 different charities, which again isn't too different from their baby boomer folks. So they're giving to the same amount of charities, but it's a smaller amount to be divided up. Let's take a look at some of their giving patterns. Millennials currently account for 14% of the total giving pie, so not a huge cross-section, but it is growing. And their channels for giving, as you might expect, skew more online than offline. Some will still give via mail, but the biggest piece for them is crowdfunding, particularly crowdfunding online. Almost 50% of millennials gave a crowdfunding gift in 2018. 40% like to give via a website. 17% like to give via social media. That's a number that's been growing. And 8% give via text, which is one of the highest numbers for text giving across the board. Again, I said text giving is pretty low. Overall giving priorities, you may be shocked to hear that for millennials, places of worship is on the very top of the list, followed by children's charities and then local social service organizations. So last but not least, let's take a look at Gen Z. Gen Z folks were born between 1996 and 2014. Now, this demographic is still being determined what the borders are around this age group. So no, this isn't set in stone, but this is what the Pew Research Center is saying today. Their ages are 24 to 6. So this is a wide-ranging demographic, some of whom have graduated from college already. Let's take a look at what we know about their giving patterns. 44% of folks in this generation give. So you'll notice that that's again a little bit less than their millennial peers, and they're giving an average of $341 per year to charity. Again, that's less than their millennial peers as well. Remember, we're just looking at those over 18, so these are folks ages 24 to 18. And think about how many financial obligations they have. Many of them haven't even gotten their first full-time job yet. Now, you'll notice that these folks are giving across a lot of different charities, 4.6, so almost 5 different charities for that $341 per year gift. That's a very small amount of money for quite a few different charities. Now, Gen Z currently represents 2% of the total giving pie, so it's very small but growing. As you might expect, in the 2013 study, Gen Z wasn't even included because they weren't even on the radar screen. Looking at channels for giving, as you might anticipate, giving online is something that they are way more prioritizing. Some will give via envelopes, about 9%, but I really would not stress paper or mail type giving with this group. 28% are giving online, but the biggest places where they like to give that's growing is social media in particular, and crowdfunding, again, is a big piece for both of these generations. And as you'll see, text giving is pretty low. Overall giving priorities for these folks, children's charities is high up on the list, followed by animal charities and health charities. Now, I'm just showing you the top 3 priorities here. If we look further down the list in this study, we do see that places of worship does fall within the top 10 for Gen Z, but it's not within the top 3. So next, I would like to walk you guys through some of the facts and figures that we know about these generations. As I mentioned, I'm going to be focusing on a few specific categories. We could be talking about a lot of different facts and figures when it comes to these audiences, but I think these four are the most important. Education, how educated are they? What was their education experience? Jobs, what's their employment status? Debt, what kind of debt loads are they carrying? And particularly, we're going to focus in on student loan debt. And then entrepreneurship, which is a new category that I think is really important, particularly when you're thinking about Gen Z, but also millennials too. So let's dive in. Let's begin by talking about education. Now you'll notice that this slide from the Pew Research Center doesn't even talk about Gen Z because again, not many from that generation have actually graduated from college yet, but I'll extrapolate some data for you. As you probably have heard, millennials are the best educated generation in our American society. And I would guess that Gen Z is on target to beat us on that front. As you can see, looking at the bottom, the bachelor's degree or higher section just goes up and up and up across the American generations, with millennials being the highest. And again, I would say that Gen Z is going to beat us on that front. However, just because you are well educated does not necessarily mean that you are getting a job with that type of education. Taking a look at these numbers, 41% of recent grads are working in jobs that do not even require a degree. Let that sink in. These graduates are coming out of college and working in jobs that don't even require a degree. More than 1 in 20 can't find a job at all. Now, the data that I'm showing you here with those two bubbles is actually prior to the recession that we're experiencing now. Thinking about the pandemic in particular and how it has impacted these 2020 college grads, which are all Gen Zers, 2/3 of college grads can't find a job. So if you're specifically looking to engage millennials and Gen Zers this year, this is a really important reality to be aware of. So let's take a look specifically at debt. Approximately, there is $1.56 trillion of outstanding student loan debt. Now, it's important to note here that student loan debt affects all generations in American society. There are people paying for their own student loan debt, their kids' student loan debt, and even their grandkids' student loan debt. The average outstanding balance for a borrower with debt is $32,000, and borrowers with more than $20,000 in student loan debt is 1 in 2. In other words, half of folks coming out of college who are borrowing money are going to have more than $20,000 in debt. Looking at 2018 graduates alone, 7 in 10 of those folks graduated with debt. So we know that millennials and Gen Zers are more educated generations. They are also more likely to be carrying this burden of student loan debt into their early career, which again is going to eat away at that discretionary income they have and other income that they might have to put towards giving. Let's take a look at entrepreneurship. This is a really interesting trend that has come up for Gen Zers in particular. Millennials, as you may have heard, are big fans of the gig economy. In other words, they might be freelancers or they might have side gigs to help make ends meet. Now, side gigs can be used because you can't make enough money with your full-time job, or it could also be used to help bulk up your savings or add in discretionary income. But we know a lot of millennials have one of those side gigs. In contrast, Gen Z is focused on working for themselves and only themselves. So they really want to be able to start their own businesses. The reason why I'm bringing this up to you is twofold. One, when you have a side gig, or in particular when you're an entrepreneur, your income may be a little bit more fluid, flexible, and a bit more unexpected, to be honest. But the other piece of this I think is even more important is these folks are entrepreneurial minded. What that means is I would engage them in your stewardship work, invite them to come in, take on projects, and take ownership. If they're entrepreneurial minded, they will know how to get that task completed. So now it's time for the moment you've all been waiting for. We're going to go through my top 10 lists of different ways that you can engage millennials and Gen Zers. And the great news is a lot of these things on the top 10 list will also be giving inspirations for people of other generations as well. So let's dive in and take a look. The first item on my top 10 list is online giving. Now, of course, as you just saw from the data with the Next Generation of American Giving study, folks in this generation really want to give online. And we're seeing this across the board with almost all of the generations in American society moving towards online giving and away from giving via cash or check. So having ways to give online is really, really important. I can't tell you how many times I've been at a congregation visiting, I've wanted to give them a donation, but the only way I could see to give was through the offering plate. I just didn't have my cash or checkbook with me. To be honest, I can't tell you the last time I had cash in my hand or wrote a check. It's just not something that's a part of my life today, and that's especially the case for younger millennials and Gen Zers. So having ways to give online is important. Now, you don't have to have every single online giving method ready at your fingertips at a moment's notice. This is something you can start slowly over time and invite people to join in on. One way to give online that a lot of people don't naturally think about is giving via bill pay through their bank account. This is actually the way that I give online, and I love this process. I go through my credit union on their website, and I choose to have Tree of Life Lutheran Church, that's my church, is my bill pay. I put in my amount that I want to give on a monthly basis, and they send out the check to the church for me. It doesn't cost me anything, and it doesn't cost the church anything more than just processing the check. It's a win-win situation with little fees. So if you're struggling to figure out how you'll implement an online giving method, that can be a great way to start for those that are regular attenders, if you have that. Now, of course, for visitors, you're going to need other ways for them to be able to give online, whether that's giving via social media, giving on your website. Find one small step that you can take to get started, and be sure to ask people in your community how they'd like to give and have that inform your decision rather than just looking at all the options out there and making a decision by committee. The next thing I encourage you to do is think about doing a crowdfunding project. Crowdfunding is a really great way to get people engaged around a specific project. Now, this is a project that has to be cause-based. There has to be a specific reason why you're doing it, a mission, a story, a vision behind it. I'm actually going to provide you guys with a couple of resources on crowdfunding to the Synod office, so you can ask them for that as well. There's one by my friend Adam Copeland that's fantastic. But if you've got a specific cause that you think might be helpful for people in the broader community, or something that those millennial and Gen Zers that grew up in your church, maybe they were even confirmed and baptized in your church, but haven't been back since, might be interested in, this could be a great way to engage them. Now, I encourage you to make it simple for yourself. Use one of the crowdfunding platforms that already exist, like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or GoFundMe, and then see how the project takes off. You might be surprised at who from your community might be interested in this specific cause, but maybe is not coming to church on a Sunday. It can be a great outreach tool and a way to make a difference in your community as well, because hopefully this is a community-focused project and not just a church-focused one. The next thing I encourage you to do is be transparent. Millennials and Gen Zers really want to know where the money is going. And let's be honest, most people who attend churches don't even understand church budgets or where the money is going in the church. They know that they're giving it in the offering plate, but they're not necessarily sure how it's used. So let's kill two birds with one stone in this situation. I encourage you to share your line item budget. Hopefully that's something you're already doing on an annual basis. But you have to remember that most people glaze over when they see a line item budget. So make it a little more robust, a little more interesting by doing something I like to call narrative budgeting. Narrative budgeting is where you tell a story using those numbers. So for instance, if you are going to put a line item budget down as $40,000 towards property, tell a story of how your property is being used. Who from the community is using that building during the week? How many people were at worship? Make it an exciting and animated story. You can also do this with staff time. Divide it up into certain areas. So for instance, if the 3 themes for your congregation were faith, hope, and love, decide how much staff time were devoted to those individual items, and then divide the pastor or staff salary out amongst those, and tell the story of how the time was being used so that people can see that a pastor's job is way more than just putting together a sermon for Sunday morning. I'll provide some resources on narrative budgeting as well. The next thing that's really important is to say thank you. What Blackbaud found in the Next Generation of American Giving study was that younger generations were even more appreciative of hearing thank you and being recognized for their gift. They want to know that their gift matters. And I have to say, I understand where they're coming from. A few years ago, I worked on a project for the ELCA, and it was one of my first side work projects where I had earned a significant amount of income. And I knew I wanted to make a big gift, or at least what to me at the time felt like a big gift from the money that I had earned. So I donated $300 to my Bible camp because I knew it cost about $300 to send one kid to camp during the summer for a week. And I was so excited to cover that cost for them. I felt so much joy in giving that gift. But I have to tell you, that gift was never recognized. I had worked at that camp as a counselor. I was invested in this place. They knew me. And I don't think I even got my tax statement until the next year, right before tax time. There was no thank you note. There was no relationship. And that big gift that I gave felt like it didn't matter. I haven't even donated to that camp since because I was so hurt by that experience. Now, you can sit there and say that that's really self-centered, to want to thank you and recognition. But if you think about it, if you're giving a gift, a large gift, most people think about and expect to be recognized for that gift in some way, just to know that the gift was received and appreciated, and particularly to know what that gift is going towards. Now, there are two ways that you can handle this saying thank you. One is publicly saying thank you, and I thoroughly encourage you to do that. Say thank you during online worship. Say thank you during the offering in the service. Put that in your letters that you're sending out or emails you're sending out to the congregation. Churches have to send out the quarterly statements of how much you've given. This is a great time to step back and add in a word of thanks to that letter that you already have to send. The other thing I encourage you to do is privately say thank you. When you're thinking about people you specifically want to recognize and write letters to or make a phone call to, make sure you're including some of these younger folks who may look like they're giving less. If you have access to the giving numbers, they may look like they're giving less. But in reality, that's probably a bigger percentage of their income, and those gifts really matter to them. They feel like it's a real investment in the community. So honor them for that. There's also been a shift from institutions to causes. One way I like to think about this is using the example of my friend Chick Lane, which I know some of you know. He used to work in your synod. Chick is about 40 years older than me. He's a baby boomer. I'm a millennial. If you look at the places where we give money away, we actually give to a lot of similar places. We give to schools that we went to. We give to churches that we've been a part of. We give to institutions where we've volunteered. But we tend to give for different reasons. Chick likes to give to places where he's had tradition and history involved with it, and he sees how they're living out that vision both now, in the future, as well as with his experience in the past. For me, it's all about the cause. I'm just as likely to give to an organization that I have a deep connection with as a cause that I come across on a website that I look into and I see the vision and I see the mission, and even though they haven't been established for a while, I believe in that cause and I believe in them to carry it out, and I want to be a part of it. So here's an example. Let's say that Chick and I were both going to give to a hospital and we were both going to attend a donor dinner. Now, let's be truthful. The odds of a millennial or Gen Z are going to a donor dinner are pretty small, but go with me on this example. If we were both going to the donor dinner, Chick would wanted to hear from a CEO or a VP of the hospital, someone who was in a leadership role who could cast the vision and illustrate how it would be lived out. That's an institutional lens. Whereas with a millennial or Gen Zer like myself, we would want to hear from a nurse, someone who had been on the ground and been invested in the story. We want to hear from them, hear about their experiences, and see their inspiring story. Something we know about millennials in particular is they give because of inspirational stories and knowing that their giving is making an impact. So be sure to illustrate to them. Have a cause-oriented mindset as you're doing this. Now, this isn't to say that everything in your church is a cause, although I do think a church is a cause in general. You might say, how do we demonstrate our heating bill, our water bill, our property as a cause? Tell the story behind it. What's happening because the heat is on? What's happening because the water is running? Tell the story, give them a visualization of that, and that will help them see the cause behind the institution. As I just mentioned, mission and impact are vital. People want to know what your real living and breathing mission is in your organization. I'm not just talking about the cumbersome one that might be typed out at the top of your annual report that you do for your church, or maybe the one that's knitted onto a beautiful tapestry in the fellowship hall. What is the mission of your church? What is God calling you to do and to be? Be transparent with this, because millennials and Gen Zers will take that up and run with it. They also want to know the impact of their gift. What's ministry and mission is happening because of this gift? Tell the story. People want to know. People want to hear those stories. And the offering time is a great time to tell those stories. The word stewardship in general does not resonate with many people. Now, I'm a person who wrote a book on stewardship that's called Embracing Stewardship, so I'm a big fan of that word. I don't think there's any other word that comes close to illustrating this idea that we are not owners of what we have. God is the owner. That being said, I know from my research that people like other words and associated with giving. And here are a couple of words that I found really resonate with folks, particularly from these generations. Care, taking care of people or places, community, faith, and mission. These come up way higher on the list than stewardship and other churchy words, and they even come up higher on the list than God, Jesus, and Spirit. So if you're thinking about framing a stewardship campaign, these are great words to focus in on. Millennials and Gen Zers likely have a lot of questions about giving and pledging. They may not know how much is appropriate to give. I remember someone I did research with asking me, should I give $5 or $500? I don't know what's appropriate. Have a conversation with these folks. This is a great thing to do when new members are joining your community. Talk about your culture around giving, and then ask them, maybe even share a few different stories of how people arrived on what they are giving to the church, to help people see it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all model. You also have to understand that pledging is a bit of an uncommon concept for millennials and Gen Zers. They're likely not pledging in other places in their life, and they may be reticent to do that because of different changes or shifts in income over the years. That's why I think if you're going to do pledging, I think you should call it an estimate of giving, so people realize that things can shift and change over the course of the year. I mean, honestly, if 2020 has taught us anything, it's certainly that. What I heard from my research with young adults is that they are longing for a place to talk about money. They want to talk about money and faith and how they go together. They really appreciate personal finance resources as well. And they want to talk about giving. They want to have a robust conversation about how you even decide how you give. I can't tell you during my research project where I talked with about 15 different congregations, how many times people would go off on tangents for even an hour talking about how much they give with one another and really appreciating hearing from the diversity of experiences. They want a space to talk about this, but you can't make it a bait and switch. You can't just talk about money and giving when there's an ask involved, because that honestly just feels a bit fishy. Have that conversation with open space so people can share a variety of perspectives without feeling like they're automatically going to be asked for a gift. And last but not least, the best advice that I can give to you is talk to those people who are already present in your community. Ask them questions about finances and giving, but also ask them what they love so much about the church, what they're passionate about, how they want to connect. Get to know them as people. Don't sit around in a room on a stewardship committee with people that all look the same and think the same as one another. Get out and have conversations and invite these folks to be involved in generative ways.